I never thought a routine delivery job would turn into the most harrowing night of my life. A story I barely muster the courage to recount. It all started on a typical Friday night. I was the go-to guy for late deliveries at the local pizza joint. That night, I got a call for a delivery that was further out than usual, about a 30-minute drive into what seemed like the middle of nowhere. The order was hefty, 5 large pizzas, which I figured meant a decent tip at the end of a long day. The drive out there was unsettling. The further I got from town, the fewer lights there were, until I was surrounded by nothing but darkness and the occasional pair of eyes reflecting off my headlights, likely a deer or some other nocturnal animal. I finally arrived at the address, which, to my dismay, was an old, run-down house that looked like it hadn't seen occupants in years, tucked away at the end of a dirt road surrounded by dense woods. Feeling a mix of confusion and unease, I double-checked the address and the order. Everything matched up. My boss always stressed the importance of customer service, so despite my better judgment, I decided to approach the house. There were no lights on inside, and it seemed utterly abandoned. After a few bold knocks on the door and no response, I was ready to leave, chalking it up to a prank or a mistake. Just as I turned to head back to my car, I heard the faintest sound from inside the house, like a whisper. Curiosity got the better of me, and I knocked again, louder this time. Silence. Then, a sudden sharp noise from behind startled me. I spun around to see a shadow dart across the yard. My heart raced. It was too big to be an animal, and the realization that someone was out there with me sent a chill down my spine. I rushed back to my car, the sense of urgency growing. To my horror, the car wouldn't start. Panic set in as I tried the ignition several times to no avail. It was then I noticed the tires. All 4 were flat, each slashed deliberately. I was stranded, alone, and vulnerable. With my phone battery on its last leg and no signal to call for help, I felt the weight of my isolation. The only option was to wait it out until morning, or until someone passed by. Time seemed to stand still as I sat there, every noise from the surrounding woods amplifying my fear. Then, tapping on the window. I froze, afraid to look, but the fear of not knowing forced my gaze. There, peering in through the glass, was a man, his face obscured by the darkness, save for his eyes, which bore into me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. He tapped again, a slow, deliberate rhythm that felt like a countdown. I screamed, not sure what I expected to accomplish, but the sound of my own voice broke the spell, and I scrambled to the back seat, looking for anything to defend myself with. The tapping stopped, replaced by the sound of someone trying the door handles, each attempt sending waves of terror through me. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence fell over the area once more, leaving me to question if I had imagined it all. Hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity until the first light of dawn began to break through the trees. As the light grew, so did my courage. I ventured out, finding my tears slashed into ribbons, confirming the night's events were all too real. With no immediate sign of help, I started walking, hoping to catch a phone signal. After a tense, long walk, I finally managed to get a signal and called for help, my voice shaking as I recounted the night to the dispatcher. The police arrived, taking statements and surveying the scene, but found no one. They suggested it might have been a local, known for troubling behavior.
Before that evening, Sarah and I had rented a cozy little house together. The neighborhood was safe, and nothing criminal ever seemed to happen there. It felt like it would stay that way forever. That is, until that evening changed everything. On that fateful evening, deciding to order takeout, I reached for the phone to call our favorite local cafe. The person on the line, familiar with our usual orders, promised quick delivery, setting the stage for what we expected to be a relaxed and enjoyable night. The weather outside was chilly, providing the perfect excuse to stay home, snuggled up in the warmth of our living room, with good food and great company. About 40 minutes later, we heard the rumble of the approaching scooter. Outside the window appeared the courier, dressed in the recognizable uniform of our chosen delivery service, approaching with our order. However, as he handed over the food, his demeanor was noticeably tense, his glances over his shoulder frequent and full of apprehension. He hesitated for a moment before leaning in slightly and lowering his voice to a whisper. "I don't want to alarm you," he began, nervously glancing once more towards the house. "But I think someone is hiding in your bushes. Just be careful, okay?" His warning, spoken with genuine concern, instantly turned our cozy evening into one filled with fear and suspicion. After the courier left, Sarah and I exchanged worried looks, and the comfort of our home suddenly felt threatened. We moved from window to window, straining our eyes to peer into the darkness outside for any signs of the supposed lurker. Shadows from trees and bushes danced in the wind, playing tricks on our imaginations. As we tried to reassure ourselves that the courier might have been mistaken, our attention was drawn to a quiet yet distinct noise from the back door. The sound of someone attempting to manipulate the lock sent a wave of fear through us. Our previous bravado vanished, replaced by primal fear for our safety. We hurried around the living room searching for anything that could serve as makeshift weapons. Our hands trembled as we armed ourselves with kitchen knives, the cold steel providing a slight sense of security. With a pounding heart, I dialed 911, my voice almost a whisper as I relayed our situation to the dispatcher. In a moment of desperate courage, Sarah shouted towards the door, announcing our intention to call the police in hopes of deterring the unwelcome guest. However, the alarming sounds at the door persisted, the intruder's determination evident as the lock mechanism continued to be tampered with. Minutes dragged on, each second feeling like an eternity, as we heard the lock being breached. Clicks and the scrape of metal against metal filled the room, a stark reminder of the imminent danger. It was then, in that terrifying moment, that we heard something in the click of the lock, a sound that chilled us to the bone. The realization that the door could open at any moment spurred us to action. In a frenzy, we pushed a heavy cabinet against the door, adrenaline lending us strength we didn't know we possessed. The bulky piece of furniture, usually requiring significant effort to move, became our barricade, a physical barrier against the threat looming outside. As we huddled behind our makeshift fortification, the sounds at the door suddenly ceased. The ensuing silence was almost as chilling as the preceding noise, the tense anticipation of what might happen next. Then, in the distance, the faint sound of police sirens began to grow louder, a beacon of hope amidst our fear. The arrival of the police marked the end of our nocturnal ordeal, their presence sharply contrasting with the vulnerability we had felt just moments before. Outside, they found no one. The intruder had evidently fled, realizing that help was already on the way. As the officers took our statements, Sarah and I clung to each other, a mix of relief and lingering fear washing over us. Memories of the intruder's attempt to breach our sanctuary, the fear, adrenaline, and relief of the sirens would linger with us, a stark reminder of the fragility of our sense of security.
I'll never forget the night that changed everything for me. It was a regular Friday evening, and I was hustling through my delivery route. The air was crisp, signaling the start of fall, and I was looking forward to finishing my shift. That's when I got the call for a delivery to a part of town I wasn't too familiar with. The address was on a street that seemed perpetually shadowed by tall, looming trees, even during the day. I found the house without much trouble, an old Victorian that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in decades. Its windows were dark, giving the impression of long-abandoned eyes staring out into the void. I remember thinking it was odd for someone living in such a place to order pizza, but then, people's living situations were none of my business. My job was to deliver, not to judge. I walked up the creaky steps and rang the bell. Silence. I rang again. Still nothing. I knocked this time, calling out, "Pizza delivery." My voice sounded too loud in the quiet of the night. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a man who looked as though he hadn't slept in days. His hair was a mess, his eyes red and sunken, but he managed a weak smile as he thanked me and handed over the cash. As I turned to leave, a cold gust of wind blew the door wide open, and I caught a glimpse inside. The house was in complete disarray, with furniture overturned and papers strewn everywhere. But what really caught my eye was the staircase leading to the second floor, where I could see the faint outline of someone, or something, peering down at us. I blinked, and it was gone. Chalking it up to my imagination, I hurried back to my car. The man must have noticed my unease because he called out, "Wait!" I stopped, heart pounding as he approached. "Please," he said, almost in a whisper. "Can you stay for a moment? Just stand in the driveway until I get back inside? I've been feeling like I'm not alone here." His request sent shivers down my spine, not because it was odd, but because of the sheer desperation in his voice. It was the kind of fear you could feel in your bones, the kind that told you something was very wrong. I nodded, driven more by a sense of human compassion than anything else. He gave me a grateful look before heading back inside, closing the door behind him. I waited, counting the seconds, my gaze fixed on the house. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time. I felt eyes on me from every window, every shadow. Just as I decided I'd waited long enough, and it was time to leave, a scream shattered the night. It came from the house, a sound so full of terror that it rooted me to the spot. Without thinking, I ran back to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. I pounded on it, calling out, but there was no response, only the echo of my own voice. That's when I called the police. They arrived within minutes, but it felt like an eternity. They had to force their way in, and I waited outside, my mind racing with the worst possibilities. What they found was a scene straight out of a horror movie. The man was in the living room, unharmed but in a state of shock. He kept repeating that it was gone now, thanks to me. When asked to explain, he rambled about a presence in the house, something he said had been tormenting him for weeks, making noises, moving objects, and appearing in the corners of his vision. He believed it was something supernatural, but the police concluded it was a combination of isolation, stress, and perhaps an intruder who managed to escape before they arrived. They never found anyone else in the house, and nothing out of the ordinary was discovered, apart from the chaos inside. I was told to go home, that there was nothing more I could do. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me. People have asked me if I believe the man's story, if I think something paranormal was at play. I honestly don't know. All I know is fear was real that night, both his and mine.